Scaling the Summit is a podcast developed by UN Global Pulse and the United Nations Innovation Network. The podcast explores essential elements to scale innovations in development and humanitarian contexts. It draws on relevant innovation research and shares experiences from a wide range of practitioners. Ultimately, we hope to give insight into what it takes to move from an idea to a fully scaled solution within the UN system. Now, one of the challenges in scaling innovation is that it's a multiplayer game. It's not something you can do on your own. You have to ask yourself the question, who else and what else do we need to help us on our journey to create impact at scale? So this raises the question of how do we work with others, and particularly how do we find relevant partners, how do we form relationships with them, and how do we build a performing value network, an ecosystem which can deliver impact at scale. Well, to help us understand this concept of a value network and the key roles that might be played within it, we're lucky to have with us today Ian Gray of Grey Dot Catalyst. Ian, welcome, and perhaps you could just frame this issue of value networks for us.
Thanks, John. Yeah, be a pleasure too. So I think taking it just a few steps back, the first thing is that there's already a number of ways of thinking about networks and thinking about different nodes and actors and those kind of things and stakeholders. And I think when I've looked at that, you've got the traditional stakeholder map, which is a 2x2 matrix, and that's just too simple and doesn't really give us the information we need when we're going to scale. But also using a sophisticated network model and network map is a bit overwhelming. It gets really quite overwhelming. If you're an intrapreneur or an entrepreneur in your team, you don't have a lot of time and you need to be able to communicate things well. And so over the years, over the past 10 years or so, working with innovations on their way to scale, we've noticed a number of different roles that emerge, that different, what we call entities play. And so by being able to really codify and understand those roles, you get a good understanding of how you work with that value network. And a value network is all the entities and actors that basically enable or constrain the value of your innovation. Mm-hmm. So that's the best way of thinking about a value network, which is why we use the term value within the network, because your innovation is trying to create value and have an impact on people's lives. And so thinking about all of the different organizations, people, but even infrastructure like Internet of Things or internet service providers really create that whole network that supports the value of your innovation going to scale. And so what we've found is that there's essentially 9 roles that are played most often. These aren't exclusively the only roles, but they are definitely the ones that are played the most often. And so just talking you through those. The first is the innovator, the innovation team, and all those who contribute to the actual development of the innovation, to the development of that intellectual property, to the development of that value as it's felt by those who use your innovation. And so we call those creators. Mm-hmm. And so obviously you might think of the entrepreneur or the innovator or the intrapreneur and their team, but also those who put money in, who invest in it as well. You need to think about them as helping you create that value. So they're all value creators, and that's our first role. The second role is the second role most of us thinks about, which is who's going to use your innovation. Who are you providing that value to? And so we call those value consumers. We very deliberately don't call them customers because they might not be buying it. Whether it's a child whose parents has bought them a gift that your innovation's in, or whether it's a health worker administering a vaccine. The actual end user or the person who benefits from that, gains the value, actually doesn't buy it. They're not a customer, but they consume the value. So we call those value consumers, and they are those who gain value from the use of your innovation. And we put those in a category called bookends because, as you can see, it's where the value is created and where the value is consumed.
Yeah.
But there's also another group within that you need to think about, and that's value captors.
Mm-hmm.
And value captors don't use your innovation. They don't gain value from the use of your innovation, but they do gain some value from your innovation existing and being delivered to the end user. So that might be someone who has invested, so they're one of your creators, but what are they capturing from that? Going back to the example of a community health worker or a rural health worker giving a vaccine, what value are they getting from that? So they're getting back the fact that they're doing their job, hitting maybe their metrics that they have to hit for the Ministry of Health or whoever it is. So they're gaining value from the use of the innovation, even though that vaccine itself, the value of the vaccine is felt by the person getting it. And so thinking about that, who is looking to capture value? Not necessarily monetary, it can be all kinds. It could be knowledge, it can be connections, it could be brand association. There's lots of different types of value that's surrounding your innovation that they might want to capture. And you can look at those in a bit more detail, and I'm sure, John, you may go into that in a bit more detail at some other point. So they're the bookends: the value creators who create the value consumers who consume it, and the value captors who are getting value from the actual creation and delivery of the innovation itself. So there are our first three. Our second kind of three are in a bit of a grouping as well, and we call that grouping movers. And that's because if you have a value network, then value needs to move around that network until it leads from the creator in the end to the consumer. And so often this is just termed as a channel. And people just think of channels. But when we look at those supposed channels in a bit more detail, there's actually three different types of movers rather than one channel. And so the first one we talk about is a channel itself. And what we define as a channel is a stakeholder or an actor or an entity that moves value but doesn't add to the value as it moves it. So for instance, if innovation is a physical product, it might be that a delivery service delivers that product for you. So it might be UPS or someone like that. They're not adding any value to your innovation. Whether it arrives by UPS or it arrives by DPD or another delivery firm, there's no difference. You still get that innovation and you're still using it. So that's a channel. For instance, also, if you're a channel to accessing the market to provide awareness and create value like that, in reality, there's no huge difference in the end value of the product, whether you heard about the product via Facebook, on a billboard advertising it, on TV. There's no difference in the product or the service or whatever as you experience it. So that's what a channel is. It's not adding value to the innovation itself. But there are two other roles that do, and one of those is a conveyor. And so a conveyor is an entity that adds value as they kind of move the innovation. So those of you who know about total quality management, if you've ever been through Six Sigma, you'll know that in a manufacturing environment, no one should ever move anything without adding value to it. And that's similar to these conveyors. So they might be upstream, they might be supplying you with components of your innovation or parts of your service or whatever that might be. But often they're also downstream. So they're between you and the value consumer. And so if you think about an education innovation, if you're using an edtech innovation that's kind of reliant on teachers delivering that, the value of the innovation itself and that edtech for the pupil is wholly dependent on the quality of the teacher's facilitation and delivery of those sessions to them. And so that kind of conveyor, the teacher, can destroy the value because they don't know how it works, or they are really poor in their pedagogy, or they can actually enhance it. So they can be actually bringing your perhaps tablet-based curriculum to life by talking to them about how that fits with things in their context, getting them to relate that to things in their own lives. So they're really adding value to your innovation. And so that's what a conveyor does. It doesn't just move value. As they work on it and as they engage with it, they increase the value of the innovation for the end user, for the value consumer. So there's one more, and that's a coordinator. And coordinators are possibly the biggest type of mover of this century. They're not new. John, you will talk to us about department stores from the 19th and 20th centuries. We can talk about medieval markets in the kind of 13th, 14th centuries. There's always been these platforms, a place where value consumers and value creators meet. And now we call them things like Uber, Airbnb, and so on. And that's where they are basically bringing together value consumers and value creators and creating value for both sides of the market. So if you think of a Airbnb, they're reducing the transaction costs and the price and other things for the value consumers. They're looking for a place to stay. If you think about the creator, they're gaining access to a huge market that they wouldn't have otherwise. So if I was to just post a room in our house on a local message board where I live, then I'm not really going to get access to all those value consumers that Airbnb allows me to do. So they're the movers. Channels who don't create any value for either the creators or consumers. Conveyors who create value for possibly the creator and the consumer. But that's one way, so they're doing it for one or the other. And then coordinators, kind of platform models that are creating value for both at the same time, both the creator and the consumer. So they're movers. Finally, shapers. And this is a really interesting group that I don't think many people think about enough on their scaling journey. And again, we've got 3 of these. So all in all, we've got 9 value roles. And the first I thought about a lot within the private sector, but not so much within the public or social sectors, and that's competitors. And so thinking about your value competitors as part of your value network. So if they're doing really well, and they're completely competing against you, they're going to reduce the value that you're able to create in this market with your innovation. Now, definitely the value to yourselves, because you're not going to be able to scale your innovation because it's being blocked by this other competitor, but also potentially for the consumers, because my guess is you think your innovation is better than anything else out there to solve the problem that the value consumer needs to solve. So thinking about the competitors is important, not just in the private sector, but also in the social and public sectors as well. And we talk about 4 types of competitors. So there's that kind of traditional competitors. So if you have a kind of an app for an agricultural extension worker that talks about prices in the market, it's not just other apps that are out there that deal with prices in the market. They're your direct competitors, and you need to think about them, but they're not the only ones. There's also indirect competitors, and they are other ways that the value consumer is finding to get this job done. And so that might be actually they've got a WhatsApp group with a bunch of other farmers who tell them about prices in the market that week. And so it might be that your fancy app, why do they need it? Because they've got a fairly contextually appropriate good solution already. So that's an indirect competitor. It's not an app like yours, but it's a group of farmers who are using WhatsApp in a similar way. So they're indirect. And then a third one is competition for resources. So I've worked, for instance, in the development sector with a number of innovation teams who say one of the issues that we have is competing over human resource. So we will train staff on maybe they're working on something on blockchain or AI. We'll work on that. And then as soon as that staff's trained up, obviously we don't pay a huge amount of wage. And so the UN might poach them, or private sector might poach them somewhere where they can get a better wage and better conditions. And so we're competing for people. So that's one example of resource competition. The other might be that you're all chasing one funding round call from a donor, and there's different innovations all trying to get access to the same pot of funding. But the fourth one, which is possibly the most important one that we don't think about, is business as usual. So you've got to compete against just the way things have always been done around here. Because your innovation probably makes some people uncomfortable in the area that you work in. It could threaten people's jobs. It could make their jobs less lucrative. It could do a whole host of things that means that people are invested in the way things are done now. That's why they carry on doing them the way they're done now. And so thinking about that business as usual, what are those things that you're going to have to compete against in order for your innovation to be adopted? Then one area that, again, is not thought of enough is complementers. And complementers are parts of the value network that you probably won't have any kind of relationship with, but because they're there, it allows your innovation to work. So going back to an education innovation that works through schools, if there isn't a teacher training college pumping out new teachers and doing on-the-job training for existing teachers, then it's going to impact your innovation because you don't have teachers to deliver that through. If you have a internet-dependent innovation, then if there isn't a mobile network or ISP that covers the geographical area that you want to scale to, then again, your innovation isn't going to work. So it's not like you're having a partnership with the mobile network to allow digital data transfer, but you need them to be there. So thinking about those complementers, who do we need? And often what people don't think enough about as they're scaling, particularly between geographies, say one country to another, is how are all those complementers there? And actually, do the complementers we have now, are they able to scale with us into these new geographies or not? And so are they there? Can we kind of work with them? And if they are there, do they work in the same way that the complementers in the geography we're in now work? Because they might not. And that brings us on to the third group within what we call the shapers, which is this group of three. And that's cartographers. So a cartographer is someone who makes maps. They kind of map out the area. And really the cartographers create the map of your value network in terms of they determine how much value can be created in that network. And so the simplest one to think about is government. So government plays a huge cartography role in most of the sectors that those of you who listen to this podcast will work in. So whether it's deciding on what drugs are allowed into a country and classified, what can go in the curriculum for education, how there's regulation of social media, all those different things the government plays a role in. So they shape that. But you'll also find that in a lot of markets, if you're working in private sector solutions, the dominant players in that market will have cartography positions. They'll be able to influence government, but they'll also be able to influence pricing and things like that. So they have a cartography. They're able to really define the value that's created in that network. But also you've got other cartographers like unions. If your innovation requires health workers or teachers or kind of water engineers to change their job, then they might say, actually, we don't want to do this. And not only is it a business as usual problem, we're going to get the union to try and say that we won't do this as a group. And so you've got to deal with unions. But also non-formal. So you might be trying to get access into a community, and it might be the gatekeepers to that community, village elders, religious leaders, etc. So they can have an influence as well. So cartographers are really important, and thinking about their role will be critical as you scale, because each environment will have different cartographers who want different things. And so understanding that is critical. So they're the 9 value roles. Creators, captors and consumers are our bookends. Channels, coordinators and conveyors are our movers. And then complementers, competitors and cartographers are our shapers.
So as we've seen, scaling innovation is a multiplayer game. We've got to think about the who else and the what else do we need to get us to having real impact at scale. And that really requires thinking about building an ecosystem, assembling some kind of a value network. Now, to explore that further, we're delighted to have with us today Casper Stridon, who's from the World Food Programme, where he works as a digital agricultural officer. But more important for our purposes today, he's also a member of the innovation team behind Farm to Go. Now, Farm to Go has already proven its point. As an innovation, it's no longer just a concept, a value proposition. It exists, it's been piloted in several situations, and it works. The challenge now is the journey to scale. So Casper, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing some of your insights. Perhaps you could just frame for us, first of all, Farm to Go. Can you tell us a brief thumbnail sketch of the innovation?
Thanks, John. It's great to be on the podcast. I'm a big fan. I've been listening to it for a while now. Farm to Go is WFP's digital solution to support smallholder farmer programs. So Farm to Go, the application, is not something that smallholder farmers use. It's an application that we developed for farmer cooperatives or aggregation centers. And they use this to register their smallholder farmers and create a profile of the farmer. And then they collect produce from their farmers. And with that aggregated produce, they now have meaningful volumes that they can make available for sale to local buyers. Now, the local buyers, they have access to a e-commerce-like application. So think of Amazon, but then they can make offers to buy the produce from these cooperatives. And that kicks off a negotiation process. So we are mirroring the way that a negotiation would take place in a normal traditional market setting. But then what we're actually doing is we're formalizing this relationship between the cooperative, who's representing the farmers, and the buyers. Now, in this negotiation process, the cooperative represents their farmers, but at the same time, the buyers who see the produce on the application, they don't have access to the details of the farmers. They only see the produce. And this is leveling the playing field in many contexts where there are gender discrimination at the traditional markets. So with this, we are connecting farmers to the market, but then we're also ensuring that they get a better price for their goods.
That sounds a great idea. And as I say, it's no longer an idea. It's working. You've piloted in a number of countries. but now it's the journey to scale. And I know you've been exposed a little to the language of value networks, not least because we met on a UN Global Pulse Scale Accelerator workshop. But I wonder if you could tell us a little about how you and your team have been using this idea of value networks.
Yeah, and this is actually one of the points where during the Scale Accelerator series, it was a bit of an aha moment for us. What we realized during the Scale Accelerator is that you used the language like inner value networks and outer value networks or external value networks. Really within WFP, we've got the opportunity to leverage our extensive knowledge and reach within our inner value network. So I started off in the smallholder support unit within WFP, and there we were focused on our program objectives, which is connecting smallholder farmers to the market, and providing them support to the aggregation centers in that way. But then within WFP, we've got so many other program activities that are also supporting the smallholder farmers. So really what we needed to refocus for Farm to Go to reach scale is to think about how can we leverage these inner value networks and how can we involve other programs to support, to provide more support to the smallholder farmers that we've now already registered and we already have a profile for them. So you can imagine that once you have the profile of a farmer and you know their location and you know what kind of crops they're growing, what kind of yields they have, then we can start to build this profile out and add other services to this farmer to help them essentially get out of the cycle of just doing subsistence farming and get them connected to the market. We've identified different units within WFP that we want to involve in this scaling journey. But then the outer value network is also important. So we are working with smallholder farmers, we are working with cooperatives and buyers, and it's really about then looking at from a buyer perspective, because they are creating the demand, what kind of buyers can we involve in this ecosystem? And for Farm to Go and WFP's context specifically, if you think about homegrown school feeding programs, there a school wants to buy local produce from local farmers. And if we now, as the WFP, start working internally together where we say, okay, we've got the smallholder farmer program, we want to connect them to the market, and we've got the homegrown school feeding program where we want them to buy from local farmers, then we can start doing this matchmaking. And it's also nice for a solution like Farm to Go, because then it's more of a controlled environment where we can provide dedicated support to the different actors using the system. So we want to work with the school-based program team within WFP to see how can we now make Farm to Go available at schools. So the school is registered as a buyer on the system, and they can buy from the local cooperatives that are representing the farmers. And for us, that's really exciting because if you think about it, these smallholder farmers, when they sell their produce to the local school, it is possible that their kids are also in that school. So the farmers are benefiting by selling their produce to a new buyer, and they are essentially feeding their own children. So for us, that's a very exciting use case that we want to explore more. We do have some examples in some countries, like in the Philippines and in Somalia, where we just launched Farm to Go, where we are starting to involve the schools as part of the training and onboarding of Farm to Go. But then for us, it's also important to ensure that, yes, we're doing this internally in WFP, but we also have to take into consideration the external value networks, or the outer value networks. And this is where we need to involve the government of the specific country. So the government who provides the guardrails of how we need to operate, they need to be part of the implementation from the early stages. And this is something that we're kind of building into our model of when we start a new implementation in a country, is we want to involve the government from the early stages so that they can see what Farm to Go is about. They can start to understand how this is benefiting some of their own objectives. And at the same time, we want to build the capacity of the government, because ideally our exit strategy is that we don't want to be involved anymore. We need to get this solution to a stage where it's self-sufficient, and it can be taken over by either private sector companies in a country or by the government. And in order to do that, we need to build the capacity of the government. We need to show them what it takes to manage a digital solution, and the costs. So this is the biggest thing. It's always the costs, because we start off offering the service for free. If I'm making quotation marks for free, but it's for free to the government, because they are benefiting from the support. So it's our in-kind support that they are benefiting from. But then what they need to start to understand is that if they want to take ownership of it, then they need to budget for it. They need to have a budget line in their agriculture or school-based program budget lines for digital. And I almost want to say this is one of the added objectives of Farm to Go. Yes, we are connecting smallholder farmers to the market, and we are bringing schools or matching schools with cooperatives that sell produce from smallholder farmers. But then essentially we are introducing governments to the digital way of doing business. And for us, that is the main external value network that we need to focus on, is the government capacity building.
That's great. And already I'm fascinated. You're using this language of inner and outer value networks. But the picture I'm getting is this isn't just a chessboard where you have a few players. This is about how you work with them, how you get them into partnerships of various kinds, how they can see benefits to them. So it's very much an active getting the active orchestration. That's the word that's coming into my mind. Trying to make this work as a system. When you and the team started to think in this way, what sorts of roles, you've already mentioned some, but what sorts of value roles came out to you? What sorts of value roles have you said, oh, that's one of those? Can you talk us through a few examples of that?
An app doesn't solve all of your problems. You need people to actually manage this application, to implement the application, to ensure that there is adoption. So what we've identified for Farm to Go that what we would need for us to scale is that we need these coordinators who are based in a country office where they can support the implementation. And these need to be dedicated adoption managers. What we've seen is that in the past, if you make it somebody's responsibility, but they have many other responsibilities. What we've seen is that when we start in a new country office with Farm to Go, we usually introduce it with the existing team there, and that team already has a lot of other responsibilities. So for us, it's important to appoint a dedicated adoption manager who will essentially be in charge of the implementation, so the training of the users and the support, the direct support to the users. This can't be done by somebody who's remote or somebody who's sitting in the office. We would need somebody to go to the field and meet with the users, have that one-on-one discussions to really understand how this solution is bringing value to them, but then also what can we do to bring more value to them. And for us, that specific role is key to the success of the scaling.
No, that's a great example, and it underlines why, in thinking about value networks, it's important to think about how that value gets moved around. And you've identified the coordinator role. It's also, for me, elements of conveyors. It's actually giving momentum. It's moving it to where it needs to be. But there's some great examples, and you've already talked about the cartographers. Maybe another question, though. Roles change. Different players might do different things. You've already suggested that the government might move from being cartographers to being much more active co-creators in the future. That's your aspiration. Roles change, and players can play more than one role. Entities can play more than one role. I wonder if you could comment a little around how you handle the dynamics of a value network.
So just an example for Farm2Go, where I was recently in the regional office in Panama, and there I met with the school-based program team, the anticipatory action team, and the tech innovation team. And the whole idea is to kind of build in a value network that has regional champions also. So we are thinking of ways where we could potentially appoint a regional focal point, somebody who would be in charge of looking at how do we connect schools to the market, and specifically how do we do that with a digital mindset. And here we're not just saying, okay, it has to be Farm2Go. We're thinking that there are many contexts in many different countries, and we can't necessarily say Farm2Go is the one and only solution. But what we're saying is Farm2Go is a good example of how you could implement it. So what we want to use Farm2Go as is a solution that kind of builds the appetite for digital within a country office. So this is again tying in with some of our other overarching goal of building the capacity of the government stakeholders, because we could say, yes, you use Farm2Go, but we could also say, well, in building your capacity, we have learned that you have other requirements, and part of our goal would be to say, okay, if you take ownership of Farm2Go, what would you want to change? Or if you don't want to take ownership of Farm2Go, how do we help you to identify a solution that does meet your requirements?
If we were looking to the future now, so imagine we're having this conversation 2 years from now, the journey to scale has gone well, you've learned a lot on the way. What lessons might Casper send back to 2024 Casper about key things in building and organizing, orchestrating a value network?
So this is the funny thing, is that in building a value network, it really comes down to how comfortable are you to reach out to other people and tell them more about your solution. I think a lot of us have this imposter syndrome where you think you're not important enough. You you don't really have the voice, no one's going to listen to you. But I think there's a lot of people that loves innovation, they love technology, but they don't always understand it. And Casper is the 2024 innovator. I should be confident in the fact that I have the knowledge, and it's my job to inform these other value network actors of what we're doing. So I almost want to say, don't be hesitant to send that first message. Don't be hesitant to reach out and tell people about a Farm to Go and the possibilities and the potential it has to make a difference. I think in the past, I sometimes felt that maybe this is not as important. If you think about a big UN organization, there are lots of people doing lots of things, and how is my thing important? Well, you're not the one to say this. So the only way that you can gauge if it's really important is to get the word out. And I think what we now have the opportunity with this whole Scale Accelerator grant is that we can leverage this exposure that we've received to say, well, look here, it does have potential. We just need a nudge. We just need some people to help us get to that next level. And again, it's the application can be amazing. The solution can be the tech behind the solution can be amazing, but we really need the people to help us reach that next level.
That's lovely. That's really powerful. And one of my heroes is Everett Rogers, who spent his entire research life trying to understand how innovations diffuse to scale. And interestingly, he called his book Communication of Innovation, because that's what it's really about, what you've just said. But it seems then we need to think it's not just shout from the rooftops and hope people hear. It's targeted communication. It's mapping who should we talk to, conversations that lead to action. And I think you've given us some great examples of how thinking of different roles within value networks can help that mapping process, can help identify which conversations are going to be important, and begin to provide the bedrock for building powerful partnerships. Thanks ever so much, Casper. Some great insights there, and really appreciate it.